All right, we're going to go ahead and install our servo into our left wing, and obviously we'll be using the AUX1 servo. But of course you want to make sure you have your grommets and spacers inserted in the servo already prior to putting them in. And here's the AUX1 servo, which is the left wing. Remember earlier we've already programmed that in video number 1. So here's a nice little string that's helps you pull the extension through the wing. It's sort of cut in a little slot and set in there. You'll see the knot end of it. You just unslot that and you can pull that right through just like that. Make sure you install the servo so the spline drive is furthest away from the hinge line and the servo arm is pointing to the wingtip, which aligns to your control horn like you just seen. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pre-drill these holes. It's best not to just force your servo screws through the wood. You cause cracking and whatnot. So I go ahead and just pre-drill all the holes, and we'll speed that up because I know you know how to pre-drill holes. Then we'll take the servo back out, and then we'll put thin CA in the holes. This will keep the holes from cracking and splitting when you're running your servo screws through there. I also like to coat all the wood, and this will help if your plane is a gas plane. This will help sort of gas proof the surfaces, or smoke proof if you're using smoke oil, and those of you that use smoke oil know that stuff gets everywhere. So just covering it with CA, hit it with a little accelerator like I'm doing here now, and then just wipe it up. That'll help accelerate the drying process. And then we'll go ahead and put the servo back in and install the servo screws. So servo screws, obviously it's pre-drilled, so we're just going to tighten this up. And obviously I'll speed this up since you know how to install servo screws. Now what we're going to do is we'll get ready for installing the servo, the control horn. So we're going to go ahead and grab the control horn out of our kit, as you can see here, and we'll sand these control horns and get ready to do that. All right, now that the servo's in, we'll install the control horn. First thing you want to do is find the 2 slots in the wing right below the servo, and take a sharp hobby knife and open up those slots. Then we're going to go ahead and put the control horn base, which came in your hardware pack. We're going to take the control horn base and the 2 control horns, slide them in together, and test fit them in the wing. Now keep in mind that these are going to push down fairly, you're going to have to use some force to get them all the way down. Those slots are layered wood in there from manufacturing, so it could be a little hard to get them down. Once down, we're going to go ahead and trace around that with a pen, because we're going to remove the covering just under that little square, that little control horn base. Again, take a sharp hobby knife and we're going to just cut along that line, and make sure that ensuring not to really cut too deep. You don't want to cut into the sheeting. Just want to cut very lightly, and we'll cut out this. Then we'll go in and peel out that little square. This will make a nice wood bonding surface for the control horn when you glue it. Again, go ahead and just test fit those in, make sure because they'll just slide in a little bit easier every time. So here we'll put them in. Don't worry, the glue will squeeze out a little bit and keep that covering from peeling up if it's not, if it's a little bit wider than the base of the control horn. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sand just the tabs in the base of that control horn that fit into the wing slot there. So we'll sand these. This will help the epoxy bond to the wood, and it'll really make for a strong bond. And again, you want to make sure you're using 30-minute epoxy as well. So we'll get these sanded up, and again, sand the base as well. Sometimes people forget to sand that base piece, making sure that the sanded side goes down. Then I'll put these together like this, just slot these in here, and then I'm going to take the control link and I'm going to put it together. So I'm going to go ahead and put the control link between the two control horns, bolt it together. This will help when gluing your control horns in. This will help keep everything square, keep everything aligned, the two holes aligned. That way you don't get one pushed down further than the other. Now there's a little shoulder on that control horn too. When you're pushing it down, you want to make sure you get it down all the way to that control, all the way to that little shoulder. So here you go. You can see that that's how it's completely assembled, and this will help you keep everything square again. So now we'll go ahead, and when you're tightening up the bolt here, you don't have to tighten it real tight. Just tighten it because all you're trying to do is hold all that together. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to glue this. Obviously you're going to want to use 30-minute epoxy when gluing it, and make sure you have some tools to have ready are the Q-tips. Q-tips really work really good for cleaning up when you push that down, the glue that comes out. Q-tips are good for cleaning that up. Rubbing alcohol will wipe off any excess glue. As you can see, I like to have a rag and all that ready for when I'm mixing up the epoxy and gluing these control horns. Now, a lot of people will do both wings at the same exact time. You know, you got 30-minute epoxy. Here's a nice thin carbon rod that I use so I can get the glue all the way down in the two slots. So make sure we mix this epoxy up really good, and we'll get that glue all the way down in those slots, and then we'll make sure that we go to covering the control horn really good as well. Now this will help if you want to put some tape around it. Not everybody does this. If you're really careful, putting tape around the hole will just help you from getting any epoxy all over the wing, just for a cleaner install. This isn't a necessary step, but it does help you when the epoxy squeezes out not to get it all over. So again, not necessary to tape this, but it does help keep things clean. So now we're going to go ahead and just drip the epoxy down with that thin carbon rod that fits down into that slot, and we're just going to make sure we get the epoxy all down in that slot. Don't want to be shy with the epoxy. You know, you don't want this. There's a lot of pressure on this joint, so you want to make sure that it's well glued. Anything that squeezes out after you put it in, you can easily clean off. So you're better to be on the a lot of epoxy side than the thin epoxy side. You don't want this link pulling out. That could cause a plane crash. So here we'll take the link itself and everything that we sanded, which is now sort of a dark gray color. Now we're going to cover all that with epoxy, which I'm doing right here. And then we'll go ahead, and once this is all done here, we'll get this all covered up and we'll just fit this in. Again, it's nice to have a Q-tip, all that stuff. Have it ready as you go. As you can see, I got to get up and get the Q-tips as I tell you to have it ready. So have it ready, and once you just squeeze that down, just sort of work it down in there and just start removing some of that excess epoxy that's comes out. That's what you want. And then use your rag with some rubbing alcohol on it to wipe up the excess epoxy once that thing's down. You want to make sure that it's pushed all the way down to that shoulder. That's precisely manufactured that way, so you want to make sure that that control link gets all the way pushed down to the shoulder, nice and tight. And then as it's drying, I like to go over and continue to sort of push it down. So here what we're going to do is install the link now. You can see here we have two different links. This is the link that hooks directly to the servo arm. This has a shoulder on it. The other link that hooks to the control horn has, you can see the difference between the two. The shoulder goes to the servo arm. So now we're going to just start to screw this link in, the turnbuckle. I like to take a tiny bit of oil, because essentially that link has no threads in it now. You're threading the threads into this link. So I like to just put a little bit of oil, because essentially that turnbuckle's cutting the thread into the link. So once you're installing that, keep in mind that one link goes one way and the other link goes the other way. So if you're sitting there turning it and it's not turning in, it's because you're going the wrong way. You got to go the opposite way. So one's righty tighty, one's the other way left. So we'll get these and a little 5/32 wrench, if you have one, will help you with that. And you'll just get this link started here. And you can see I even went the wrong way there. So now we'll take the other one and get that. Again, a little bit of oil. We'll put this one together, and then we'll start to measure up that distance between the servo horn and the control link. Now keep in mind, we're going to wait for this epoxy on that control horn to set up. Best to let it set up overnight. At the very least, probably 2 or 3 hours before you go back to this. So I like to do it on the one wing and then go to the next wing and start installing all the stuff in the next wing. So I sort of do it alternate while the epoxy is drying. You don't want to be doing a lot of this. All right, so we've gone ahead and let the servo control horn set up for 24 hours here, and we're just going to unhook this one and the link that we glued it with, and then we're going to go ahead and put the link that we've already assembled, we're going to bolt that on. And one of the things we're going to do here is you're going to make sure that you put, and I did it backwards here. You're going to put the washer. So here I'm putting the bolt through and the washer on the other side. You're going to put the washer on the bolt side, and then the nylock nut you'll put on the other side. It doesn't need a washer. The nylock nut has more surface area on the control horn, so you don't have to worry about it pulling through or anything. So the washer goes on that side, and then we'll go ahead and tighten this up, and we'll start to set up the control link from here. So keep in mind, we're going to plug in the radio now. Keep in mind, we're working on the left wing. You want to make sure you have the right that you have it plugged into the right slot on your receiver, the aux1 slot, because in video number 1, we preset the sub trims, making sure that the control horn was 90 degrees to the servo or the servo arm was 90 degrees to the body. So, and we have preset sub trims in there already. So if you were to plug it into a different slot on your receiver, you'd have a different set of sub trims and it would throw you off. So make sure when you're arming the radio and the servo to get ready to adjust this link, that you have it on the right one. All right, so this link is parallel to the hinge line, which when we set up the radio earlier, we set it up that way at 90 degrees to the body. So here you can see, I'll show you in the radio, our endpoints are 145, 145. Now this is just a starting point for the high rates And we'll set everything up as starting at high rates, and then we'll add dual rates in down the road during the setup video. But at this point, we're just going to make sure that we're at 145, 145, and we'll set up the link now with that. So what we're going to do is we want to make sure that when we set up this link that there's no binding, that the length of the link is perfect to that the aileron is level with the counterbalance or the root of the wing. So here you'll see I'm setting that screw in. It just needs to be a little bit at an angle, so I'm going to shorten the link a little bit, and then we'll get that to where that screw just easily screws in with my fingers. And then we'll tighten that up, and we'll see where our aileron is in relation to the root of the wing. So you can see here, we'll get this tightened up, and then down here at the bottom you can see I'm a little bit off. So I'm really close, but a little bit off. So now want to make sure your servo arm is tight as well, because any play in there could make a difference as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put the servo screw in. And remember, the servo arm screw, you have to use a link, or you have to use the little lock washer that goes with it there. Make sure you get that lock washer down tight. We'll get this servo screwed down tight, the servo arm screwed down tight, make sure we don't have any weird play in our adjustment. So now remember that this adjustment is just a rough adjustment. We'll go back and fine tune this adjustment a little bit later in like a setup video, but you want to get it as close as you can here. So now that we got this tight, there's also on the spot-on servo arms, which we're using here, there's a pinch bolt as well. So we'll get that pinch bolt tight here in a second. But again, here I'm adjusting to make sure that the aileron is even with the root of the wing. So you can see here that it's not above or below. We'll get that mechanically adjusted. Don't use your sub trim in your radio to do this. Anytime you use sub trim in your radio, it's going to take away from, you know, the travel on one side of your endpoint. So it's best to get this mechanically set. Remember, your sub trim is what set the 90 degrees on the servo. So you want this link geometry to be correct by getting it mechanically set properly. The other thing I like to do is make sure the ball links are completely flat. They're not twisted or turned a little. That keeps it from binding. You don't want any binding in this this link setup here. So now we'll go ahead and check the radio setup. So as you can see, we're on the one side. So this side we have full travel, and on this side, so yeah, this side here we're traveling all the way, and on the other side we're a little bit short from full deflection. Now, full deflection isn't necessary in the ailerons, but as you can see, we'll scroll to the left aileron setup. We'll look at the sub trim, and as you can see, we have 18 points of sub trim in that, which isn't a ton, but it is enough to take away from the 18 points away from the opposite side. So we'll go into the endpoints and we'll sort of see if we can get rid of, get a little bit more travel out of this side. But 145 is probably, we'll see, we'll get here and here and go to your endpoints. Now, you'll see in your endpoints when you're on the box and you move it to the side you want to adjust, that little box will shrink down to just one side of your travel, and that's the side of your travel you want to adjust. So you can see here I'll adjust it live, moving it back and forth, and it looks like 145 is the full travel here. So That's the full amount that we'll get. But you got to remember, we only need 45 degrees of travel. So clearly, if you look at this, we have more than enough travel on either side. So we're going to have to go into and fine tune that once it's installed on the plane. Get your degree meter on there. Looks like after moving the servo here, working it, we got a little bit of adjustment to make here to make sure that aileron's even with the wing root. Let's adjust that. But going back to what I was saying is we'll get the wing installed, and then we'll set up the degrees. We'll set it to high rate, 45 degrees, and then go ahead and add our dual rates in going down from there. So here's that pinch bolt I was telling you about on the spot on arms, and I know SWB has them as well. I'm going to go ahead and get some blue Loctite. Now that we have this set as pretty close as it's going to get, we'll use some blue Loctite on this and get this pinch bolt tight. You don't want to leave anything undone in this process. Go ahead and just finish it up. Make sure your servo arm bolt is tight, your pinch bolt is tight, and all your links are tight. So here I'm going to go ahead and remove the link. Now I do double protection here. Some people don't. I'm going to go ahead and remove the link. I'm going to put some blue Loctite on it because the servo arm is threaded. So I'm going to put blue Loctite on this, and then I'll thread that down in there. And then I'm going to take the nylock nut that's supplied in your hardware package, and I'm going to put the nylock nut underneath there. This works out pretty good, double protection, especially if you have a gas plane where you're dealing with vibration and all that stuff. And I get it's only a DA50 on this particular plane, but you don't want to, it's better safe than sorry. You don't want to lose an aileron. So I just use a little, since it's tight between the wing and that, use a little pair of hemostats to hold that nut on there, and I'll get this started. And then I'll go ahead and lock that down with my wrench. So you want that nylock nut to be tight. You don't want anything loose on your aileron setups. So better safe than sorry, and cost you an airframe or a plane. So go ahead and get this tightened up. So now here's that binding that I'm telling you about. If that link is turned at all, I like to just make sure those are all as flat as possible. Make sure there's no binding in there at all. You'll see I'll take a pair of pliers here, just lightly turn the link a little bit, holding the turnbuckle, and just make sure that link's flat. So it's not any side to side twist. And there you go. We are all ready to move to the setup phase. So I just want to take a minute to talk about this link adjustment. I want to make sure that you understand the adjustment. Right now we're at 145, 145. We got full deflection on one side and not full deflection on the downside. We talked about that being part of the sub trim. We got 18 points of sub trim to make that arm 90 degrees to the bottom. So if you go into the setup phase and you find out that you have to dial down your one endpoint to say 120 to get your 45 degrees, and you got to dial down the other side to say 100 to get your 45 degrees, that you can move the servo link in on the servo arm to pick up more travel. The goal is going to be to keep your geometry correct and maximize servo resolution. So what you want to have is that 120 to 130 in your endpoints. So make sure your mechanical adjustments match that as we go into the setup phase. And I'll talk more about that during that time frame. So here you can see that I'm talking about this is where you move your bolt in, you move the servo in one bolt, and you pick up endpoint travel in your radio to get your max resolution out of your servo. So again, it's important to make sure that you're in that 120 to 135 range or 130 range.